In 1947, the U.S. Navy sailed to the coldest, most desolate place on Earth and came back weeks early with a story they never told the public. For decades, Operation Highjump has been officially described as a routine Antarctic training mission. But for those who have studied its shadowy history, the whispers tell a different tale. One of Nazi Antarctica bases, hollow Earth gateways, and unidentified flying objects that could outpace any aircraft of the era. In the aftermath of World War II, the idea that remnants of the Third Reich could hide beneath the frozen continent sounded like pulp fiction, yet strange radio silence, unexplained casualties, and cryptic warnings from Admiral Richard E. Byrd continue to fuel the mystery. Was this truly just a test of cold weather survival? Or did the Navy encounter something deep under the ice that could change what we think we know about history? This is the untold story of Operation Highjump and what might still be hidden in Antarctica. In 1947, the U.S. Navy sent the largest Antarctic expedition in history to the bottom of the world and came back weeks early, battered, silent, and forever changed. Officially, it was called Operation Highjump, a cold weather training exercise designed to test survival, establish research bases, and map the frozen wasteland. But for those who have studied the mission's trail of conflicting reports, strange disappearances, and whispered accounts from men who were there, that explanation doesn't hold. The rumors that have clung to Operation Highjump for nearly 80 years speak of something far more dangerous, a hidden Nazi fortress carved into the ice, a possible gateway to the legendary Hollow Earth, and sightings of unidentified flying objects that could outrun anything in the Navy's arsenal. In the uneasy years following World War II, the United States had emerged victorious, but not unchallenged. The Cold War had begun. Every coastline, every sky, every frozen corner of the map was suddenly a potential battleground. Antarctica, the fifth largest continent on the planet, was no longer just an untouched wilderness. It was a strategic prize. And according to certain classified briefings, it might have been hiding something ancient and alive. The ice itself was a fortress over 5 million square miles of polar desert, with winds that could strip the paint from steel and temperatures that could plummet to 128 degrees. On paper, no human settlement could survive there for long. Yet history had already left its footprints in the snow. In 1938, Nazi Germany had sent an expedition to Queen Maud Land, a remote sector of Antarctica, planting their swastika flags in the ice and naming it New Swabia. Official records claim they were looking for whaling grounds. Unofficial accounts suggest something else entirely, that the Nazis were searching for ancient entrances to a subterranean world described in fringe science and occult myths, a place their leadership believed was home to the Aryan master race. The idea was dismissed as propaganda until whispers of U-boats slipping into the South Atlantic long after Germany's surrender began to surface. Theories emerged. The war hadn't ended for everyone. Some claimed that a last battalion of Nazi soldiers had escaped to Antarctica, armed with secret technology, and built an impregnable base beneath the ice. That was the theory. Operation Highjump, some believe, was the test. Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, a decorated polar explorer and national hero, was given command of a task force of unprecedented size, 13 ships, 33 aircraft, and over 4,700 men. The mission's official objectives were printed for the press. The unofficial ones were never admitted to. From the moment the fleet crossed into Antarctic waters, the weather turned against them. Men reported instruments going haywire, compasses spinning uselessly, radios hissing with static. Reconnaissance planes reported strange breaks in the ice, sudden mists that seemed to swallow entire mountain ranges, and patches of water far too warm for the surrounding climate. These were noted in logs, but buried in official summaries. This was no ordinary survey. In the weeks to come, some of the men in Byrd's command would swear they saw things that couldn't be explained: flying craft with no wings, moving in ways that defied known physics. The few who spoke about it later were ignored, ridiculed, or, according to some, pressured into silence. Was the Navy's mission truly to map the ice, or to confront something that had been festering beneath it since the days of the Third Reich? To this day, the full answer remains buried in classified files. But the events that unfolded during those brief, tense months would fuel one of the most enduring and chilling conspiracies in military history. Operation Highjump wasn't supposed to be a battle, but what the Navy found in Antarctica might have been the closest we've ever come to war with something not of this earth. From the moment we left port, the rumors were already swirling through the ranks. Officially, we were part of Operation Highjump, a cold weather training exercise. Unofficially, well, the whispers were far less ordinary. Some men swore we were going to hunt for a hidden Nazi base in Antarctica, a place where the last of Hitler's loyal soldiers had retreated with stolen technology. Others muttered about ancient ruins buried beneath the ice remnants of a civilization older than humanity itself. No one knew for sure. The only thing that was clear was this Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd was in command. And when Byrd led an expedition, it was never routine. I remember the first time I saw the full scale of our task force stretched across the harbor: 13 ships, including an aircraft carrier, destroyers, icebreakers, supply vessels, and submarines. There were over 4,700 men on board, each of us assigned to a role that could mean the difference between life and death in the frozen South. The air was heavy with the scent of diesel and salt water, and somewhere in that chaos, a quiet sense of anticipation settled over us. We were going to the most inhospitable place on Earth, and for reasons none of us fully understood. Before we sailed, the briefings drilled the same points into our heads: extreme cold, unpredictable storms, and the constant danger of frostbite. But there was something else, subtle, almost unspoken. The way the senior officers glanced at each other when certain questions were asked. The way some of the maps had blank white spaces, areas marked with nothing more than a number or a faint circle. These were the places, they said, we'd be flying over. These were the places Admiral Byrd seemed most interested in. The journey south was long, cold, and filled with a kind of tension that was hard to name. At night, in the mess, you could hear men trading stories about the 1938 Nazi expedition to Queen Maud Land, about U-boats that supposedly vanished into the Southern Ocean after the war ended. One old gunner swore that his cousin had been stationed in Argentina when a German submarine surfaced there months after Germany's surrender, its crew silent about where they had been. He said they had a look in their eyes like men who had seen something no one would believe. The closer we got to the Antarctic Circle, the stranger things became. The weather changed without warning, clear skies turning to blinding snow squalls in minutes. Compasses began to drift, sometimes spinning uselessly. The radio crackled with bursts of static that no one could trace. Some of the older sailors muttered about magnetic anomalies. Others blamed it on the sheer remoteness of our location. But a few of us noticed something else. Those moments of interference always seemed to happen when we passed certain coordinates that weren't on our charts. By the time we reached the edge of the ice, the sea itself seemed different. Massive icebergs loomed like frozen fortresses, and the wind screamed across the decks with a sound that could cut straight through your bones. It was here that the Admiral gathered the senior officers and aviators for a closed-door meeting. We weren't invited, but word travels fast on a ship. When the doors opened, the looks on their faces told us more than any official order could. This wasn't just about training. Something out there had gotten their attention, and we were about to find out what. That night, as I stood watch under a sky filled with alien constellations, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The ice was vast, endless, but there was a weight in the air, a kind of silent pressure. Whatever was waiting for us beyond that frozen horizon, it wasn't going to be in the manuals. And if the whispers were true, if the Nazis really had built a fortress beneath the Antarctic ice, then Operation Highjump was about to become something far more dangerous than anyone back home had imagined. We weren't just heading into the cold, we were heading into the unknown. The first thing you notice in Antarctica isn't the cold, it's the silence, out there, beyond the roar of the engines. There's a stillness so absolute it makes your own heartbeat sound loud. But as we pushed deeper into the ice, that silence began to change. It wasn't just the wind anymore. It was something else. At first, the anomalies were subtle. Instruments that had worked perfectly the day before started giving readings that didn't make sense. Compasses spun as if chasing ghosts. Gyros drifted. The radio hissed and popped, carrying fragments of voices in languages we couldn't place. Men cursed the interference, but the navigators just exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what it meant. We were crossing into zones where the rules we trusted didn't seem to apply. The weather turned against us in ways no forecast could explain. Clear skies would collapse into blinding whiteouts in minutes, the sun swallowed by swirling curtains of snow. Sometimes, we'd emerge from those storms into eerie pockets of calm, the sea like glass, the air strangely warm against our faces. One morning, a reconnaissance flight reported something impossible, a stretch of open water nearly a mile across, steaming in the frigid air. The surface shimmered like liquid silver, and around its edges, the ice had melted back into jagged walls. They brought back photographs, but when those prints made it to the Admiral's hands, we never saw them again. That patch of water wasn't on any chart, and the pilots swore they could see movement beneath the surface. As the days passed, the anomalies grew bolder. Strange auroras flickered on the horizon, not the green ribbons you'd expect, but sheets of pulsing red and violet rising from the ice itself. At night, the glow would dance across the undersides of the clouds, painting the snow in colors that didn't belong in nature. More than one man whispered about energy power seeping up from beneath us. We weren't just dealing with the extremes of weather. It felt like the continent itself was alive. Then came the sound. It started low, barely audible over the engines, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in your chest. It would fade for hours, then return, stronger, sometimes accompanied by a sensation like static crawling over your skin. No one could pinpoint the source. The sonar operators swore they were picking up faint mechanical echoes from beneath the ice shelf patterns too regular to be natural. We joked about it in the mess to keep the fear down. But in the back of our minds, we knew the truth jokes are just fear wearing a smile. The turning point came during a flight over the coast. A patrol plane broke radio silence to report an unidentified structure jutting from the ice, a smooth, curved wall, black against the white. The pilot described it as metallic, with a faint symbol etched across its surface. He didn't have time to describe more. The transmission cut off in a burst of static. When we reached the site hours later, it was gone, buried, as if the ice had swallowed it whole. Officially, nothing had been found. But the look in that pilot's eyes when he returned, it said otherwise. Antarctica wasn't just fighting us with the elements, it was hiding something. Every day, the sense of pressure grew heavier, as if we were trespassing in a place that didn't want us there. And whether it was the work of nature, the remnants of a secret Nazi stronghold, or the edge of something far older. One thing was certain: the ice was watching. We didn't know it yet. But the anomalies were just the first warnings. Something out there was going to step out of the shadows, and when it did, Antarctica would no longer be silent. It happened on a day that should have been like any other: cold, clear, and brutally quiet. The kind of day where the sky over Antarctica looked almost too big, stretching forever in every direction. But that morning, something hung in the air, an unspoken tension that made every man on deck a little quieter than usual. We were steaming through a corridor of icebergs when the first call came over the radio from a reconnaissance plane ahead of us. Multiple bogies, fast-moving, no visual confirmation yet. At first, the officers assumed it was a mistake. Out here, in one of the most remote places on Earth, there shouldn't have been anything else in the sky. But then the pilot's voice sharpened, cutting through the static contact. 5. Repeat. 5 unidentified craft inbound. Low altitude. Moving fast. Seconds later, the lookout shouted from the starboard side. I scrambled to the rail, and that's when I saw them: dark shapes skimming just above the ice, sunlight glinting off surfaces that weren't wings or fuselages. These weren't planes. They were disc-shaped, metallic, and moving with an agility I'd never seen before. They weaved and pivoted like predators in perfect formation. As they closed the distance, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold: a black emblem painted on the underside of one of the craft. The swastika. The order went out across the fleet general quarters: all hands to battle stations. The calm of the Antarctic morning shattered into chaos. Guns swung toward the incoming shapes, tracer fire stitching the sky. But the discs moved too fast, darting out of the line of fire and circling back with precision that felt inhuman. Then came the counterattack. There was no flash, no visible weapon, just beams of intense light that struck with surgical accuracy. When those beams hit metal, it warped and hissed. When they touched the ice, the surface exploded into plumes of steam. I watched one of our scout planes take a direct hit. The craft didn't just fall, it disintegrated mid-air, scattering flaming debris over the snow. The destroyer USS Maddox, steady and defiant in the water, caught one of those beams across her bow. In seconds, flames erupted, and then came the explosion: deep, gut punch loud, ripping through her hull. She listed hard, smoke pouring from the wreckage before the cold sea swallowed her. The thing that struck me most wasn't just their firepower, it was the control. The discs never broke formation, never panicked under fire. They moved like they were hurting us, pushing us back. The air was alive with gunfire, explosions, and the strange, low hum that seemed to radiate from the enemy craft. Through it all, Admiral Byrd's voice cut in over the comms, steady, measured, but carrying a weight I'd never heard before. Maintain formation. Do not pursue. Hold the line. It wasn't a battle cry. It was a survival order. Hours later, after the last of the strange craft vanished over the horizon as quickly as they had appeared, the deck was littered with shell casings, the air thick with the smell of burnt oil and scorched metal. We counted the dead, the wounded, and the ships too damaged to continue. Nobody said it out loud, but we all knew we had been tested and found wanting. Whatever we had just faced wasn't a weather anomaly, wasn't a trick of the light, it was real. And it had chosen to let us live. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the ice, I realized something else: this wasn't the last time we'd see them. They had made contact. And contact always comes with consequences. The battle changed everything. Before that encounter, there had been doubt, skepticism that we'd see anything more than wind, ice, and shadows. But after watching the Maddox vanish beneath the Antarctic waves, after seeing our planes torn apart by beams of white-hot energy, there was no doubt left. We weren't alone on this continent, and whatever else was here was willing to fight. The hours that followed were a blur of controlled panic. Fires had to be fought on 3 ships. Ammunition stores were checked, then checked again, because no one knew if another wave was coming. We were trained for combat, but this was different. This was a fight against something faster, smarter, and far more advanced than anything our Navy had ever faced. On the command deck of the USS Philippine Sea, Admiral Byrd stood in the center, flanked by officers reading off casualty reports and damage assessments. His jaw was set, his eyes locked on the horizon, as if expecting those disks to reappear at any second. The debate was short and brutal. We had 2 options: push forward deeper into the ice, risking every ship in the task force, or retreat and live to fight another day. Some of the younger officers wanted to press on to prove that the United States Navy didn't turn back from a fight, but Byrd knew better. "We came here to train and to recon," he said finally, voice low but carrying across the deck. "We didn't come here to start a war we don't understand." In that moment, the decision was made not just to retreat, but to survive. The order went out for all ships to pull back, regroup, and prepare for the long journey home. The retreat wasn't simple. We had to navigate treacherous ice channels while keeping constant watch on the skies. Every shadow on the clouds, every glint of light on the horizon felt like it could be them. Men slept in short bursts, rifles within arm's reach, listening for that low, electric hum we'd all come to dread. It never came. And maybe that was the strangest part the enemy let us go. Some said it was a warning, others a show of dominance, like a predator letting its prey know exactly who was in control. As we cleared the worst of the ice, I caught a rare, unguarded moment from the Admiral. He stood alone at the rail, staring back toward the continent, his face a mix of frustration and something I hadn't expected: respect. Maybe he recognized that whatever lived beneath the Antarctic ice wasn't just a threat, it was a power in its own right. But if we thought retreat meant safety, we were wrong. Byrd ordered a secure transmission to Washington the moment we were back in range. The details of that message were never shared with the crew, but the next morning, word filtered down from the officers. The mission's official report would list adverse weather conditions and logistical difficulties as the reason for our early return. No mention of the discs, no mention of the attack, no mention of the lives lost to something not even acknowledged in the official record. It was as if the battle had never happened. We left Antarctica with our ships battered, our ranks thinned, and our minds full of questions we couldn't ask. But the silence from above told us everything we needed to know. Whatever we'd stumbled into down there wasn't going to be made public. Not then. Maybe not ever. And that silence, that was the real order of the day. The kind of silence that keeps secrets buried under miles of ice. When the Antarctic ice finally disappeared behind us, you could feel the shift in the air, not relief exactly, but something heavier, like a burden we weren't supposed to bring home. The fleet limped northward, hulls scarred, morale battered, and every man aboard carrying images he'd never forget. The official orders were simple: no discussion of what happened. We were told the mission was being classified at the highest levels for public consumption. Operation Highjump would be remembered as a training exercise, cut short by unexpected weather conditions and logistical challenges. But every man who stood on those decks knew that was a lie. The lie was the mission's second battle, and it was fought in silence. On the voyage back, Admiral Byrd spent long hours in his cabin, sending encrypted transmissions to Washington. We never heard the exact wording, but one thing was clear: the man who had walked both poles, the most experienced polar explorer alive, had seen something that had changed him. When he finally spoke to the press weeks later, his words were careful, almost surgical. He warned of hostile forces with the capability to travel from pole to pole at incredible speeds, a statement that sent ripples through anyone paying attention. The newspapers printed it, but within days, the quote was being clarified, reinterpreted as a comment on Soviet bombers. The official narrative was being stitched together in real time. Meanwhile, among the crew, the stories wouldn't stop. Quiet conversations in corners of mess halls and shore leave bars all came back to the same haunting details: the discs skimming above the ice, the beams of heat that melted steel, the symbol burned into their undersides. Men who'd never been superstitious now spoke about something ancient under that continent, something that had watched us long before we arrived. And yet, in official records, those moments didn't exist. The ship's logs for those days were sealed. Damage reports were rewritten. Deaths in action were attributed to accidents and extreme weather events. The families of the lost received folded flags and vague explanations. The truth had been erased before it even had a chance to breathe. The strangest part was how quickly the mission faded from public memory. By the summer of 1947, other headlines had taken over: political unrest, Cold War tension, and a growing obsession with the sudden spike in UFO sightings across the United States. To those of us who had been there, the timing wasn't a coincidence. The same kind of craft we'd seen over Antarctica were now being spotted over American skies. If the connection was real and it meant the enemy hadn't stayed in the ice, they'd followed us home. There were whispers that the attack on our task force had been a warning, not just to us, but to our entire country. If that's true, Washington got the message loud and clear. Some of the men I served with never spoke of it again, burying the memory as deep as the ice itself. Others tried to tell their story, only to find themselves discredited, their accounts twisted or ignored. A few simply vanished into civilian life, carrying the burden alone. As for Admiral Byrd, he would return to Antarctica one more time, but never again with the kind of force we brought in Operation Highjump. Some say he wanted to go back, to see for himself what we had truly encountered. Others believe he'd been told in no uncertain terms that the ice was off limits. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. The official history books would never match the memories of those who had been there. And maybe that was the point. Because if the public ever saw what we saw, if they ever knew how close we came to a war with something we couldn't even define, the world would never sleep the same again. The ice kept its secret, and so did we. Time has a way of burying things: truth, memory, even entire battles. Decades have passed since the fleet returned from Antarctica, but for those who were there, Operation Highjump has never ended. The ice may have closed over our wake, but the questions still cut like wind across the Ross Sea. What exactly did we encounter out there? Was it the last remnant of a Nazi Antarctica base, hidden beneath miles of ice and defended with technology far beyond 1940s science? Or was it something older, a civilization from the so-called Hollow Earth, watching us the way you might watch a dangerous animal stray too close to your home? The official record will tell you nothing. It will say we trained in extreme conditions, we mapped the ice, and returned early due to bad weather. But if you look just beyond those neat lines of text, you'll see the gaps, the missing days in the logs, the damage to ships that doesn't match any storm, the casualty reports with details unavailable. It's in those blank spaces that the real story hides. Admiral Byrd himself, a man not given to exaggeration, left us one of the few public clues. In a Chilean newspaper interview shortly after the mission, he warned of a potential threat from hostile forces with the ability to travel from pole to pole at incredible speed. Some have argued he meant Soviet bombers, but those of us who stood on the decks that day, watching metallic discs dance across the Antarctic sky, no better. You don't confuse a bomber with what we saw. And if Bird's words were a warning, it was one that Washington quickly swept under the rug. In the years that followed, UFO sightings surged across the United States and around the world. To the average citizen, they were strange lights in the night sky, objects that appeared and vanished without explanation. To us, they were a grim reminder the ice wasn't keeping them contained. If they wanted to cross oceans, they could. If they wanted to reach our cities, nothing we had could stop them. The thought still keeps me awake some nights. Some believe these craft, whether Nazi-engineered or ancient, were powered by technology derived from natural forces deep inside the Earth, a kind of energy source lost to surface civilization. If that's true, then Antarctica is more than just a frozen wasteland. It's a vault, a gate. And gates are meant to keep things in or keep others out. To this day, certain regions of Antarctica remain heavily restricted. Scientific teams operate under strict oversight, and even military operations are bound by international treaties. It's presented as environmental protection. Maybe that's true. Or maybe it's something else entirely. A quiet agreement that whatever lives under that ice is better left alone. But here's the problem with secrets. They don't stay buried forever. The planet is changing. Ice melts. Technology advances. Satellites see more than ever before. And one day, something might shift down there. Something that forces the truth into the open, whether we're ready for it or not. I've often wondered if that's what those craft were telling us back in 1947. Not an attack, not an invasion, a message, a warning. Stay out. We left when they wanted us to, and we haven't returned in force since. But warnings have a shelf life. If the ice melts far enough, if the wrong people go looking, or if whatever's down there decides it's time to come up, then Operation Highjump won't just be a classified Cold War story. It'll be the opening chapter of something we can't control. And when that day comes, the official history won't matter. The only thing that will matter is that we had our chance to prepare and we let it vanish into the cold. Because some ghosts don't haunt the past. They wait for the future. In the end, maybe the question isn't whether the Navy found a Nazi Antarctica base, or a gateway to the hollow Earth, or something far older than both. Maybe the real question is, why we were never meant to know. Secrets like this aren't just about history, they're about control. If you knew the truth, would you sleep as easily tonight? Or would you be watching the skies? If this story made you think differently about what's buried under the ice, tell me in the comments. What do you believe happened during Operation Highjump? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Save it so you can revisit the details. And subscribe because the next story we uncover might be even harder to forget. Some truths don't wait, and neither should you.